This week's Parshat Tazria-Metzora deals with the halachas of tzaras, which we know you get from Lashon Hara. The Rambam, in the very end of Hilchos Tumas Tzaras, has a fascinating line, and I'd like to share it with you. He says, "Va'al inyan zeh mazir b'Torah va'omer yisham v'negah tzaras zachar asher asa Hashem Elokecha leMiriam baderech." The Torah says, "Be very careful. Remember what happened to Miriam when she was on the way." The Rambam proceeds to tell us what happened to Miriam. Harayu Omer Hizbonu Ma'ir LeMiriam Hanaviyah Shedibra Ba'achah She Gedola Mimenu B'Shanim V'Gidla Osal Bercha V'Sakana Ba'atzma L'Atzilu Minayah. What was the relationship between Miriam and Moshe? Moshe was obviously younger, and she raised him on her knee. She was very involved in his chinuch, and not only that, we know that she put herself in danger to find out what would be with Moshe Rabbeinu when he was floating down the Yam before he was rescued by Bas Paro. V'hilo dibra b'gnusa, ella tal shehishvas oso l'shar neviyim. She didn't even really say anything bad. What did she say about Moshe Rabbeinu? She said, how could Moshe Rabbeinu separate from his wife? He's just like every other Navi, and there's no halacha that Nevi'im need to separate from their wives. V'hulo haya makbid al kol elu advarim, shenemar ish Moshe anav ma'od v'af al pikein miyad nensha b'saras. And even though Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't really care if somebody spoke ill of him, he was confident in himself, true anivas, he was truly humble. Nevertheless, the Torah punished her because of this slight lashon hara that she said. Rav Chanan Wasserman asks a phenomenal question on this Rambam. He says, how could the Rambam possibly say that Moshe Rabbeinu was compared by Miriam to other Nevi'im, and that's not such a big deal? That's one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah is obviously the greatest nevuah that ever was. How could Miriam have made such a fundamental mistake and compared Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah to another Navi? And furthermore, even if you want to say that she did make such an error, the Rambam would no longer have a kal v'chomer. Because what's the Rambam's kal v'chomer? We who really say lashon hara are going to be in such big trouble because of Miriam, who really didn't do anything. But perhaps the reason that Miriam got in such big trouble was because she equated Moshe Rabbeinu to other Nevi'im, and therefore the whole kal v'chomer would fall apart. Rav Chanan Wasserman gives a brilliant teretz. His teretz is that it was exactly in that Maisa with Miriam where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mechadish that Moshe was pe'el pe'edaber, and therefore Miriam was not a kofer, chas v'shalom, because the Torah had not yet been mechadish that Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Navi ever. I would like, with some level of humility, though certainly nowhere near the true anivus of Moshe Rabbeinu, to suggest an alternative teretz. There are two dinim that are going on simultaneously here. The first din is Moshe Rabbeinu's quality of his nevuah, the nevuah itself. Of course, Miriam did not mean to suggest that Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was qualitatively the same nevuah as her or Aaron. Rather, what Miriam meant to suggest was that despite the quality of his nevuah, at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu has a shem navi. That's his chalos, that's his status. He's a navi. And as a navi, it does not engender a new halachic status where he would need to separate from his wife. Therefore, Miriam's question was not predicated, chas v'shalom, on equating Moshe Rabbeinu in terms of the quality of his nevuah, but rather on the status of him as a navi. And that, perhaps, would not be kfira, thus answering Rav Chanan Wasserman's kasha. Fundamentally, though, I think there's an incredible lesson to be learned here. We must watch what we say. We are a generation that is so careless with what comes out of our mouth. I know personally, many of you have heard my shiurim, I can be very careless with what comes out of my mouth. And I think that's human nature for a lot of us. I think what makes the halachos of lashon hara really spectacular, something that I think really enhances our lives when we actually study them in depth, is we come to the hakara that what we say is really meaningful, and who we say it about is really important. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, He used His words to create the world. When we speak, it creates relationships. When we speak lashon hara, it diminishes relationships. One could argue that every single relationship that we have in this world is the microcosm for the macro, which ought to be our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have to take our words so seriously. I once heard from Rav Moshe Weinberger that if we really want to study Hilchos Lashon Hara, what we really need to study first is Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. If we can really learn to love our fellow Jews, then we would never speak ill of them. It wouldn't even cross our minds, because we would be so in love with them that we could say, how could we say that about these people that we love? And so I think this lesson of Miriam, of really, she had no ill will. This was her brother, who she cared about, who she saved. She would never have said anything badly about them. And I think that's really what the Rambam is coming to tell us. And even she was punished. Kal v'chomer us, we must be so careful the way we speak about others, to create a world of peace, of harmony, and of tranquility.